In this chapter, you'll learn about the following organizations: the United Nations, the International Civil Aviation Organization, the European Union, the European Aviation Safety Agency, National Aviation Authorities, also known as Competent Authority, and Accident Investigation Units. At the end of the Second World War, the United Nations was formed and began laying out some plans for the new world order that was constructed after the battles. The objective of the UN was to prevent war. The strategy chosen by the UN was to promote peace through trade. The strategy rested on two principles. Firstly, that trading nations will become dependent on each other's well-being, and secondly, or consequently, that nations should trade on equal terms in order for them to remain non-hostile, equal terms signifying equally advantageous for each party. In 1944, a convention was held in Chicago, and a set of ground rules were laid out, later referred to as the Convention on International Civil Aviation, or simply the Chicago Convention. In 1947, the United Nations formed the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, to administer the ground rules of the Chicago Convention. The objective of ICAO was, and is today, to realize the strategy of the UN with regards to international civil aviation. Perhaps most essential is the task of creating equal terms for trade related to aviation products and services. This is generally translated into the term flight safety. There are many benefits associated with flight safety. Most relevant may be the faith you have as a user of aviation services, and of course the political credit taken by lawmakers on the safety level created by administrations. In the international political environment, flight safety plays the role of determining a required resource amount that each aviation operator must allocate for flight safety. Of course, it's not expressed in economic terms, but in relevant technical terms describing factual requirements that are considered by subject experts as contributing to flight safety. It's important to note that flight safety inherently is non-productive and non-profit generating. Of course, only until you crash and no one wants to fly with you, but by then it's too late. ICAO executes its task by publishing procedures and requirements that member states of the United Nations are meant to adhere to. There are three levels of publications issued: standards, to which member states must adhere; recommended practices, to which member states must endeavor to adhere. Standards and recommended practices are found in publication known as annexes, as in an annex to the convention. The third type of publication is known as documents. Documents outline how and in how much detail member states are supposed to adhere to the standards and recommended practices. I'm sure you noticed the political leeway given in the distinction between standards and recommended practices and the contradicting effect it has on the United Nations objective. ICAO controls the perhaps needed variance of adherence by committing member states to notify of any difference from standards and recommended practices there may exist in each member state. If one state goes rogue, the remaining states can then veto its membership. Along with laying the burdens of flight safety standards upon member states, the Convention also grants privileges to member states. The privileges granted member states are sometimes referred to as the 5 freedoms, though some argue that as many as 9 combinations of the freedoms exists. These privileges are without prior permission to overfly other member states, make transit stops for non-traffic purposes, upload passengers, cargo, or mail from other member states, offload passengers, cargo, or mail in other member states, upload passengers, cargo, or mail when flying from a given member state to any other given member state, and upload or offload passengers, cargo, or mail for flights within any member state if not specifically denied. There are two exemptions to these freedoms. You may be restricted to airfields that provide custom controls if no bilateral agreement exists in this regard, and you may be excluded from flying over areas to which the member state cannot provide search and rescue services to due to remoteness. The original design did not envision recreational flying as part of the convention, but instead only distinguished between whether the air traffic was regular or on demand, and whether it was for commercial purposes or not. Since the leisure flying was not considered in the convention, you as a private pilot will find that only the first couple of freedoms have any relevance to you, since the remaining freedoms are only applicable for aircraft engaged in international air service. ICAO uses the term scheduled traffic versus non-scheduled traffic when referring to the regularity of flights, and they use the term international air service versus non-traffic purposes when referring to whether a flight is commercial or not. Non-traffic being, of course, non-commercial. Recreational flying therefore falls in both categories, in that it is non-scheduled and that it is for non-traffic purposes. Other side effects of the work performed by ICAO is that rules are kept uniform within each member state. You may have noted earlier that rules published by ICAO are only applicable to member states. They are not applicable to citizens within the member state. The idea is that nations should develop national regulation on the basis of ICAO standards and recommended practices, and that this regulation shall be recognizable for pilots from other member states, making it easier for you to fly into other nations. Additionally, ICAO requires that its member states recognize certificates and licenses from other member states, again enabling you to exercise your privileges almost anywhere. Well, that's all you need to know about the UN and ICAO, and perhaps a little more.